They called it the meat grinder, and for good reason. The Battle of Verdun, 1916, 10 months, 300 days of absolute hell. This wasn't just a battle. It was industrial-scale slaughter, a nightmare factory that turned men into broken shells, a place where the concept of humanity went to die. And when it was over, the survivors couldn't talk about it. They wouldn't, because some horrors are too deep for words. Let me take you there. It started with a calculation, a cold, brutal calculation. German Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn had a plan. He didn't want to capture Verdun. He wanted something worse. He wanted to bleed France white. His logic was horrifying in its simplicity. Verdun was a symbol, a fortress city that had protected France for centuries. The French would defend it at any cost. So Falkenhayn decided to turn it into a killing floor. He would pile up French bodies until France had no soldiers left to send. He called it Operation Gericht, Operation Judgment. And judgment came at dawn. February 21st, 1916, 5 a.m. The Germans unleashed the heaviest artillery bombardment the world had ever seen. Over 2 million shells in just 12 hours. That's 140,000 shells per hour, more than 2,000 shells per minute. Imagine that. Imagine standing in a trench while the world explodes around you, every second, every minute, for 12 straight hours. One French soldier wrote, "The sky itself was on fire. The earth heaved like the sea in a storm. Men were buried alive, screaming under tons of mud and metal. Forests vanished. Villages evaporated. The ancient forts that had stood for centuries crumbled like sandcastles. The landscape was transformed into something from another planet. Nothing but craters, mud, shattered trees, and body parts. A German officer described it as a lunar landscape, but one where the moon was made of corpses. The French weren't prepared. They'd stripped Verdun's defenses to send troops elsewhere. The forts were undermanned. The trenches were incomplete. When the bombardment started, some positions were simply deleted from existence. But then, something remarkable happened. The French refused to run. General Philippe Pétain took command and made a promise that would echo through history. Ils ne passeront pas. They shall not pass. And he meant it. Pétain organized something unprecedented, the Noria system. He rotated entire divisions through Verdun every few weeks. This meant that by the end of the battle, 70% of the entire French army had fought at Verdun. Nearly every French soldier who survived the war had been through the grinder. The only lifeline was a single road, the Voie Sacrée, the sacred way. Day and night, trucks carried fresh troops in and broken men out. One truck every 14 seconds. For 10 months. Every soldier knew, sooner or later, it was your turn. And Verdun changed you, always. Let me tell you what it was actually like down there. The shelling never stopped. Not for hours, not for days. Weeks passed with constant bombardment. The noise alone drove men insane. Soldiers described a sound like a million hammers pounding on a million anvils. A roar so loud you couldn't hear yourself scream. Men's eardrums burst. They bled from their noses and ears. Some went deaf permanently. Others went mad, just sat in their dugouts, rocking back and forth, hands over their ears, eyes vacant. The French called it obusite, shell shock. The mental breakdown from constant, unending terror. Sleep was impossible. You'd try to rest, and the ground would erupt underneath you. Soldiers learned to sleep standing up, leaning against trench walls, because lying down meant you might be buried alive when the next shell hit. And the shells were everywhere. German artillery had perfect range. They could drop shells directly into trenches, directly into dugouts. There was nowhere safe, nowhere to hide. One soldier wrote, "We lived like rats, we ate like rats, we died like rats, and after a while we started to think like rats. Only survival mattered. Everything else was gone." Then there was the mud. February 1916 was cold and wet. The shells churned the earth into a thick, sucking swamp. Soldiers would step off the deckboards in the trenches and sink up to their waists. Some sank deeper. And if you couldn't pull yourself out, if there was no one to help you, you drowned. Standing up, surrounded by your fellow soldiers, drowning in mud. Rescue attempts were often futile. Men would try to pull their comrades out, only to get stuck themselves. Bodies remained in the mud, sometimes just a hand or a head visible, a reminder of the man who'd been there. And the smell. God, the smell. Bodies everywhere, thousands of them, tens of thousands, rotting in no man's land, in the trenches, in the shell craters. The French couldn't bury their dead fast enough. Sometimes they used corpses to reinforce trench walls because there was nothing else available. Rats grew fat on human flesh. Soldiers described rats the size of cats, bold and aggressive, crawling over sleeping men, biting anyone who didn't move. One French officer wrote, "We are living in a charnel house. The dead are our furniture, our walls, our companions. After a while, you stop seeing them as people. They're just there." The Germans advanced, slowly, brutally. By March, they'd taken several key positions. By June, they'd captured Fort Vaux after one of the most brutal sieges in history. Let me tell you about Fort Vaux. The fort was completely surrounded. No supplies could get in, no reinforcements. The German flamethrower teams attacked the fort's corridors, underground tunnels where French soldiers fought in pitch-black darkness. Imagine fighting in a stone corridor. Complete darkness, the air thick with smoke and the smell of burning flesh. You can hear the enemy, but you can't see them. You fight with whatever you have: rifles, grenades, shovels, knives, bare hands. Men fought and died in corridors so narrow you couldn't swing a rifle. Bodies piled up. The wounded screamed in the darkness. There was no way to evacuate them. And then the water ran out. The garrison's water supply was destroyed by German shells. 700 men trapped underground with no water, in June, with the heat building. The soldiers drank their own urine. They licked condensation off the walls. They sucked on dirty rags. Men went mad from thirst. Some killed themselves. Others tried to surrender individually, but were shot by their own officers to maintain discipline. Major Sylvain Eugène Raynal, the fort's commander, held out for 7 days before surrendering. When the Germans finally entered, they found men who looked like corpses, hollow-eyed, delirious, barely human. The German commander was so impressed by their resistance that he allowed Raynal to keep his sword, a sign of respect between warriors. But respect didn't change what Verdun was doing to both sides. Because here's the thing nobody talks about: the Germans were suffering too. Falkenhayn's plan was to bleed France white, but Germany was bleeding just as badly. For every French soldier killed, a German soldier died too. The meat grinder worked both ways. German soldiers called Verdun Das Himmelfahrtskommando, the mission to heaven, because once you were sent there, you weren't coming back. German accounts describe the same horror, the same mud, the same rats, the same psychological breakdown. One German soldier wrote, "We thought the French would break first. We were wrong. We are all breaking together." By summer, both armies were exhausted. Units were at half strength. Entire regiments had been wiped out and reformed multiple times. The casualty lists were so long that newspapers stopped publishing them. And still, the battle continued. July brought a new horror: gas attacks. Both sides used phosgene and chlorine gas. The gas would settle in the low-lying shell craters, invisible, waiting. Men would take cover in a crater during a bombardment and breathe in poison. They'd die choking, drowning in their own lungs, clawing at their throats. Gas masks helped, but they were primitive. They leaked, they fogged up, and in the chaos of combat, men often couldn't get them on in time. One French soldier described watching his friend die from gas. He turned blue, his eyes bulged, pink foam poured from his mouth. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of pure agony. And I could do nothing but watch. The gas didn't just kill, it maimed. Men survived with destroyed lungs, spending the rest of their lives struggling to breathe, drowning slowly over decades. By August, something shifted. The British launched the Battle of the Somme, forcing Germany to divert resources. The German advance at Verdun stalled. And then the French counterattacked. General Robert Nivelle took over from Pétain and went on the offensive. Using new tactics, rolling barrages, small unit assaults, better coordination, the French started taking back ground. October 24, 1916. Fort Douaumont, the most important fort in the Verdun system, captured by Germans in February, was retaken by French colonial troops from Morocco. Fort Vaux was abandoned by the Germans and reoccupied by the French. By December, the front line was almost exactly where it had been in February. 10 months of fighting, over 700,000 casualties, and nothing had changed. Nothing except the men who'd been there. The numbers are staggering. Let me put them in perspective. 700,000 total casualties. Dead, wounded, missing. That's roughly 70,000 per month. About 2,300 per day. 95 per hour. More than one soldier every 40 seconds for 10 straight months. The French suffered approximately 377,000 casualties. The Germans about 337,000. Some historians put the numbers even higher. But numbers don't capture it. Numbers can't. Because many of the dead were never found. The shelling was so intense that men simply ceased to exist. Blown apart, vaporized, buried so deep they'll never be recovered. After the war, the French created the Ossuaire de Douaumont, a memorial containing the bones of 130,000 unidentified soldiers. French and German bones mixed together, impossible to separate. The memorial has windows at ground level. You can look down and see the bones. Thousands of skulls, femurs, ribs. The remains of men who died so violently they couldn't even be identified. And that's just the ones they found. When the survivors came home, they couldn't talk about it. Journalists would ask, "What was Verdun like?" The veterans would just shake their heads. Some would walk away. Others would sit in silence for long minutes before finally saying, "You can't understand. You weren't there." One veteran said, "If you weren't there, no words can explain it. If you were there, no words are necessary." Another wrote, "Verdun killed something in us, not just our bodies, our souls." The men who went into Verdun died there. The things that walked out were just shells. Post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't understood then. These men suffered in silence. They had nightmares for decades. They'd wake up screaming. They'd dive under tables when they heard thunder. They'd panic at the smell of fireworks. France called them les poilus, the hairy ones, because they couldn't shave in the trenches. But really they were ghosts, walking ghosts of the men they'd been. And Verdun itself? Verdun never recovered. The land around Verdun is called the Zone Rouge, the Red Zone. Over a century later, it's still too dangerous for human habitation. Why? Because the earth is poisoned. An estimated 12 million unexploded shells remain buried in the soil. Every year, farmers plow up old ordnance. People still die from shells exploding 100 years later. The soil itself is toxic. Heavy metals from the shells, arsenic, lead, chemical weapon residue. Nothing grows right. The trees are stunted and twisted. You cannot farm there. The French government forbids it. It's a scar on the earth that will never heal. Every year, the démineurs, bomb disposal experts, collect tons of unexploded ordnance. They estimate it will take 300 to 700 years to clear it all, and that's if they're lucky. The war ended in 1918. The battle ended in 1916. But Verdun is still fighting. So why? Why did this happen? Both sides knew by summer that Verdun was pointless. Both sides knew they were destroying their armies for no strategic gain. So why continue? Pride, symbolism, the inability to admit defeat. Verdun became about more than tactics. It became about national honor, about proving that your side could endure more than the other, about refusing to be the one who blinked first. And so men died, not for victory, but for something else. Not for territory, but for pride. Falkenhayn was fired in August. His plan had failed. Germany was just as exhausted as France. Pétain became a national hero, but the experience broke him too. In World War II, he'd collaborate with the Nazis, believing France couldn't endure another bloodletting. Verdun had taught him that some costs were too high. Here's what Verdun teaches us. War isn't glorious, it's not honorable, it's not an adventure. War is industrial murder. It's young men ground into the mud for the egos of old men. It's horror so complete that the survivors spend the rest of their lives trying to forget. Verdun was the moment when humanity looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back. And what we saw there was ourselves, our capacity for organized, systematic, industrial-scale destruction. The veterans of Verdun knew this. They tried to warn us. One French veteran, speaking in the 1930s as another war loomed, said, "If the world understood what Verdun truly was, there would never be another war. But they don't understand, they can't, and so we'll do it all again." He was right. 23 years after Verdun ended, the world went to war again, and it was even worse. The soldiers who fought at Verdun are all gone now. The last survivor died in 2008. But their legacy remains, in the graveyards, in the Zone Rouge, in the memorial that holds their bones, and in the warning they left us. Some battles aren't fought to be won. They're fought just to survive. Verdun was the battle where survival itself felt like defeat. Because when you turn war into industrial slaughter, when you reduce human beings to production statistics, when you feed men into a meat grinder for 10 months straight, everyone loses. The dead lost their lives, the survivors lost their souls, and humanity lost its innocence. Verdun stands as a monument to that loss, a reminder of what we're capable of when we forget that the enemy soldiers are human beings too, when we reduce war to numbers, when we let pride override sanity. They called it the meat grinder, and it ground up everyone who touched it. The soldiers knew. They refused to speak about it because some horrors are too deep for words. But we need to remember. We need to understand. Because the only thing worse than remembering Verdun is forgetting it.